God was there to tell me, I had a responsibility to replace my grandfather.
And I want to write them so that I'm bringing Canadians with me to the center of wherever the hell it is we're all going together.
We can't accomplish this unless humanity comes together.
Hi, I'd like to welcome everyone to Becoming a Writer, a panel offered by the Words Literary Festival and featuring relatively recent graduates of the Department of English and Writing Studies. I'm Dr. Aaron Schneider, a professor in the Department of English and Writing Studies at Western, and I'm going to be moderating the panel tonight. I want to begin with a land acknowledgement. So I'm speaking to you from the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenape, and Attawandaron peoples, on lands connected with the London Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant wampum. I am currently, as you can probably tell, at my dinner table several kilometers east of the forks of the Thames, or what is called the Antler River. And very often land acknowledgements are gestures, they're symbols, and as potent as they may be, they're also quite momentary and evanescent. So I want to encourage everyone to do something a little bit more meaningful and a little bit more substantive. On July 19th, 2020, so this summer, the land defenders of 1492 Landback Lane stopped the housing development of Mackenzie Meadows near the town of Caledonia in the Six Nations Reserve. That's just a few hours further east of where I am. At this moment, they continue to resist the development, and they are raising money to pay for their legal fees because they are facing harassment from the OPP and other organizations. You can find that GoFundMe by Googling 1492 Landback Lane Legal Fund, and I just dropped the link into the chat where you can find it there as well. If you can, I would encourage you to donate. If you can't donate, I would encourage you to spread the word to those who can. So now I'd like each of the panelists to do a land acknowledgement because in the era of Zoom, we're coming to you from very different places. Sydney, I'd like to start with you.
Hi, everyone. So Camille and I are in the same place. Camille and I are speaking from the land that is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people.
Thanks. Erica.
I'm currently situated on Musqueam land in what is commonly known as Vancouver, British Columbia.
Richard.
I'm coming to you from Montreal, or Tiohtià:ke, situated on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among many First Nations, including the Kanien'kehá:ka of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, Huron-Wendat, Abenaki, and Anishinaabe.
Gabby.
Hello, I'm coming to you from what is commonly known as Wolfville, Nova Scotia, which is the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people.
Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that this panel has been very graciously sponsored by Writing Studies, and just explain to everyone how it'll work. Each of the panelists, I'm going to introduce each in turn, and then we'll do a brief reading, about 5 minutes. Then I'm going to ask some questions. We'll have a discussion about things like becoming a writer. And that will run until about 6:45, 6:50, at which point we'll open the floor up to questions. So if there's anything you hear during the discussion, during the readings that you'd like to ask about, drop that question into the chat or into the Q&A, ideally into the chat where we can see it. And we'll do our best to ask that of the panelists during the question period, or hold the question to the question period and drop it in then. So without further ado, I'd like to start with our first panelist, Erica McKeen. She's a writer, event organizer, and teacher. She received her MA in English Literature from Western University. She's assistant editor at the Thames Review and co-organizer of LOMP reading series. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in Filling Station, the Dalhousie Review, Long Con Magazine, and Manola Review, among others, and her debut novel is forthcoming with Invisible Publishing. Welcome, Erica.
Thank you so much. I'm going to be reading a little bit from the forthcoming novel, just a tiny piece here. And just for a little bit of context, it's about a character, Jeanette, and her interactions with her TA. So very on topic. All right. Aaron, go on. Aaron knows the book, so he might know what I'm talking about here. Yep. I'm not supposed to do this, Peter said. Jeanette sat in a chair on the other side of his desk. It was the second time she had visited him in his office that week. The weather was getting colder, and out the window behind Peter, Jeanette could see students rushing by with their heads down, chins tucked into their scarves, pushing against the wind. Behind her, the door to the office was closed. Do what? Asked Jeanette. I'd like to see you, said Peter. His voice was low, hollow in the middle of his words. He looked at her lips, the red wine color of her lips. I'd like to drink wine with you, he said. I want to see you drinking red wine. His words were slow, measured, stiff as if rehearsed or overused. Jeanette unintentionally blanched, her body shuddering and in the same moment covering the shudder by jerking her chair closer to the desk. She imagined them at a restaurant together, red wine and candlelight, dark hardwood floors and light-footed waiters, bowing minutely, whisking away platters, a scene she had witnessed 1,000 times in movies, but never in real life. A table with white tablecloth between them instead of this desk. A meal between them, food small-looking on large white plates, luxury that Peter could probably afford. The waiter coming by, nimble as a dancer, to refill the wine, and Jeanette fumbling in her large, dark-wooded chair, her underage ID sitting like a rock in her pocket. Jeanette blinked. I'm 18, she said. Peter laughed, a bellow that rolled up from his chest. I'm not asking you out to dinner, he said. He laughed again, hard and sharp. Oh, said Jeanette. I'm asking you to drink wine with me. I'm sorry. Did you think I was asking you out to dinner? Come to my place. We'll drink wine. It's simpler, he said. And as he said this, there was still a glint of light, of laughter in his eyes. I bought this bottle recently, $45. I don't usually splurge, but... Okay, said Jeanette. She could feel distinctly the shape of her body in the chair, the hard edge of her tailbone digging into the wood. She drew her arms closer to herself. Okay, she said. Good, said Peter. Okay, said Jeanette. Okay. His apartment was small by Canadian standards, a bachelor with a kitchen in the corner, a bathroom, one closet, a bed that took up the majority of the living area, and a coffee table crowded with books and empty bottles of gin. There was a desk pushed up against the wall, doubling as a dining table and guarded by a slumped black chair. The place was the opposite of his office. It was untidy and careless, with clothes on the floor, a jumble of shoes by the door, notebooks and CDs, discarded gloves, thin European-style scarves and cigarettes, a tall box of tea, chocolate wrapped in tinfoil from his last visit to Germany that he would offer her later, and postcards on the kitchen counter displaying various pictures of Cone Cathedral. He had left the room this way purposefully, messy but not dirty, cluttered but clean-smelling, vacuumed, a facade of vulnerability, proof of trust. I've been busy, he explained, as he always explained to women who bore witness to his apartment. Horribly busy. But Jeanette, holding her elbows in her hands, was looking past the room and out the glass door that led onto the balcony. In the distance were the hulking shapes of other apartment buildings, dotted with similar glass balcony doors. Between these buildings were long rectangles of sky. They talked for a while. They watched TV. They listened to music, and he told her about Germany, how the bread tasted from the bakery in the morning, how the Rhine looked and smelled, how the train sounded as they rolled out towards Switzerland and Austria and Belgium. Jeanette listened. They drank his $45 bottle of red wine. They kissed, talked some more, had sex in the light coming through the balcony door. When it started getting dark, he rode the elevator with her down to the lobby and pointed the direction back to the subway. The next day, when she had a question during the break in the middle of class, Peter suggested Jeanette visit him later in his office. It was the first time she had made love in a public space. She considered it public despite the jacket they hung over the small square window in the door. She could hear professors and students mulling by in the hallway, could hear doors opening and closing, people greeting one another or locked in quiet conversation, a keyboard clacking in the adjacent room. She could almost hear, somewhere deep within the walls, the slow rumble of a lecture steadily proceeding, She thought of Peter with his head bent, taking notes that first day in class. And she felt, as Peter flattened her against the side of his bookshelf, that she was somehow making love to the university itself, that it had moved inside of her, that it touched her with practiced fingers, that it dissolved her skin, dissolved her vocal cords until the soft sounds she made were no different than the outside sounds passing through the cracks around the cupboard door. Jeanette cleaned herself up using the tissues Peter kept in his desk drawer. She went home to shower and to sleep and to wake and to cry inexplicably as she warmed up leftovers in the microwave for dinner. Thanks.
Our next panelist is Camille Intson. Camille is an award-winning writer, multidisciplinary theater and performance maker, digital media artist and researcher, currently based out of Toronto. Her prize-winning works as a playwright have been produced across Canada, though she also dabbles in fiction and prose. Camille most recently completed her Master's in Performance Practices Research at the Royal Centre School of Speech and Drama in London, England, and is embarking on a PhD in Information and Knowledge Media Design at the University of Toronto's iSchool. Welcome, Camille.
No. If you see a little 12-week-old kitten running around, that's Leo. He doesn't leave me alone. Okay, so I'm going to be reading an excerpt from something very, very new about a play that currently doesn't have a name. And it's about a liberal university campus where this brilliant kind of neurodiverse computer science student named Martin creates a virtual reality prototype where you can plug anyone's images into the model, and it simulates really intense VR sex with that person. And he sells this prototype on the black market of his campus. So on a surface level, this play is about the ethics of VR sex, but on a much deeper level, it's about human desire and its ethics and sexuality and shame. And it's a play told entirely in interweaving monologues. And this is the very first one, the opening one. That's rough, but this is what we're doing today. Right. Okay. So I'm not sure what they've told you, but I'm here to cooperate. I'm not gonna yes, I made the prototype. I'm not gonna deny it. Okay. I'm not. Why would I? I did the prototyping, programming, testing, coding, everything. But that's only. I mean, it's not my fault. Seriously, it wasn't even my idea. So I'm not saying you should just, because I should be. I mean, I am responsible in a way. But sorry, I'm freaking out here. It's not just I didn't think it would the way it did. I mean, how could I have known? And if I did know that it would, I would have stopped it for sure right away. So I guess I should, it's really stupid the way that because it didn't start with real people. Well, yes, real people, but actors, celebrities. Kevin Pasquino, he's one of my best friends, and I were hanging out in his basement, and he turned on the TV, and there was this this video of Jane Fonda getting arrested on the steps of the White House. So he turned to me and went, "Man, I wonder what it would be like to smash Jane Fonda." And I was like, "Man, that's kind of fucked of you to say. Isn't she 80?" And Kevin goes, "Yeah, but I bet she's a freak." And sorry, this isn't, a point is, Kevin's the one who brought it up. I was just showing him the VR goggles, and he was like, "Can you with anyone on that thing?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know, because I've never," and Kevin's like, "Oh, you find a way to get me to cyberbang Jane Fonda in a prison suit, and I'll give you $200. And I was like, "Okay, wicked, and I'll take that. Easy money." I knew I could do it. So why not? And also, I have to say that I actually looked it up, and from what I understand, it's totally legal. It's not like I was using kids or something. That would have been, but I swear to God, I did my research. You got to understand, I've never even gotten detention. I'm on Dean's list. I got a 4.0. I've never done a bad thing in my whole entire life. So you're probably wondering, Martin, then how to get here. Well, when the Jane Fonda thing kind of took off, people started talking. It got around. I think he must have, I don't know, shown people or something, because I kept getting asked about it. Oh, do me, do Charlize Theron, do a cyberpunk Billie Eilish thing. And I was like, no, because it was midterms and I was kind of busy. But then in my comp sci class, we had this group project, and the professor, Dr. Flack, put us into pairs, and I got paired up with Corey Robertson. Now, Corey is big, jock, burly, muscle kind of guy, very, shoulders. I think maybe we made eye contact once before this. He kind of keeps to himself. He's quiet, but he'd been in a couple classes of mine since first year, so I knew who he was. So Corey and I are working on this group project, and he comes back to mine one day, and we get talking, and I get to showing him the goggles somehow, and we get to talking about Jane Fonda, and apparently he heard it from Kevin's friend Puck, who's on the softball team, and next thing you know, he made me this offer, and that's where things, excuse my words here, got fucked. See, the goggles, sorry, this is important, are like super high tech, highest tech. My mom's a VP at K-Tech. You know K-Tech? Yeah. So these are early release, not even out yet. You got the classic immersive VR 3D experience, but then you've also got these like surround sound sensors all around the headset with dozens of different functions that can, say, simulate different parts of your brain. So when you're, doing the it feels like it. Not that I would, hey, not that I would know, okay, because I've never, yeah, not just with the headset, but like ever. Look, I don't want you guys thinking I'm some kind of pervert because I'm obviously not. It wasn't that interested me. I mean, not really. It was the figuring out how to do it, the programming work. It was academic, I swear. So when Corey brought it up, I don't know, it was like an experiment, like a challenge. And when someone like Corey Robertson asks someone like me for a favor, I don't know, you just do it. That's my reading.
That was wonderful. Great. Our next panelist is Richard Joseph. Richard is a master's student in English at McGill University. His writing has appeared in the Globe and Mail. He was a finalist for PEN Canada's 2020 New Voices Award and longlisted for both the 2020 CBC Short Story Prize and the 2020 CBC Nonfiction Prize. He is currently working on his MA thesis in his first novel, The Pythia, which explores the life of a young journalist in Toronto. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you so much, Aaron. So the reading I'll be doing here is from a short piece. Like Camille, it's a quite recent piece. It's called Rain Dance. I'll be at the conference until Monday, said Cynthia, with a reassuring smile at the table. Until then, if you need anything, you can always call or text. We all nodded, except Dylan, who was fuming because he hadn't been invited to the sales conference. To conceal his irritation, he took a few swigs from his thermos, which was always fascinating to watch. He drank water like someone who was about 3 times his size, like a bouncer at a nightclub. The crook of his elbow forming a right angle, he tilted his head back, his lips clamped around the top of his thermos, and swallowed powerfully, audibly. I assumed it was water, but it occurred to me that it could be leaded diesel or horse blood. There was no reason any of us would have been invited. The conference was for full-time employees, and we were all contract. But still, Dylan was livid. He'd asked me earlier how he was expected to advance in his role if he was never given the opportunity to do so, and I'd responded to this psychotic, reasonless, insane question with a sort of sympathetic murmur. What about, said Armin tentatively, looking around for support, this? He glanced at the floor-to-ceiling windows, which separated us from the ongoing thunderstorm. It was, I suppose, quite the storm. I don't know. I'd lost some of my capacity for wonder since I began working here. We were on the 5th floor, and the rain was battering itself violently against the glass, and the sky was more or less constantly stark white with lightning. Muffled by the plate glass, it sounded like a dishwasher going in the distance. A look of faint distaste crossed Cynthia's face. Armin often had this effect on her. He was lacking in a particular sort of tact, always saying the wrong thing. Once, when Cynthia mentioned she was buying a property to rent out, he'd exclaimed, "You're going to make bank," and she didn't talk to him for 3 days. The situation is ongoing, she said. We'll be monitoring for changes. They're saying it's going to get pretty crazy, Armin persisted. Dylan shook his head. It's just rain, and the thing is, he began, and launched into one of his explanations, cold fronts and cumulus clouds and convection currents. I lapsed into a stupor as we all waited for this to abate. I felt my eyes lose focus. When he was done, there was a brief silence, and it fell to Cynthia to speak. It shouldn't be a problem, she said, and repeated. The situation is ongoing. The storm did, in fact, let up. I stared over the top of my computer screen and out at the lush green fields outside, which were covered in the wide, even stripes from the lawnmower. I saw the guy who rode the mower in the mornings, his head clamped in his enormous noise-canceling headphones like a pecan and nutcracker, working his way methodically up and down the grass. I wondered enviously what it would be like to look back at the end of the day and know that you'd accomplished something concrete and physical and countable. 6 million blades of grass eviscerated into a frothy green pulp by those whirling blades. It was really very healthy grass, even when it was cut. I didn't know why they took such pains to maintain it, given that it was private property, and no one from the office ever used it. What would they do anyway? Take their lunch out to the middle of an open field and stand there? Presumably the maintenance was solely for the benefit of the people inside, so that they'd have something to look at. A depressing thought. This lawn was fertilized and watered and mowed, and the lawnmower oiled and maintained and insured, and the lawnmower man paid, all so that our view was unobjectionable, the world's most expensive desktop background. The rain had drummed up the worms, and then the sun cooked them alive. They were monstrous near our building. Perhaps they had been eating whatever it was they were putting in the grass. I found one dying, writhing on the hot pavement, longer than my arm, longer than a skipping rope. I watched, my whole body shivering with revulsion, nausea rising in my throat, as it flailed, pink and desperate, telescoping in and out of itself. The storm started up again with redoubled fury. At lunch, everyone stood by the windows in a hushed, worried cluster. There was murmured talk of working from home, which Dylan dismissed with a snort. Haven't these people ever heard of umbrellas? He said scornfully. I can't believe, people can do what they want, but I'm not leaving. Don't you like working from home? I asked. Yeah, I feel like I get more done, Armin said. This struck me as a flagrant and unnecessary lie. Whenever Armin worked from home, his Skype status would go inactive and then immediately active again every half an hour, indicating that his screensaver had kicked in and then he jiggled the mouse to banish it. The thing is, said Dylan, I like being here. I have my monitors set up the way I want. Working from home just throws off my whole vibe. The next morning, Armin sent an email to Cynthia, Dylan, and me to let us know he was working from home. I had a feeling he'd be the first to abandon ship, Dylan confided to me. Did I tell you I saw him vaping at his desk? He thought nobody was looking, and he just took a hit from his vape and blew the smoke into his drawer. Seriously, I said, and corralled my features into disgust. I thought of the monstrous worm wiggling on the sidewalk, contracting and expanding until I gagged. He looked surprised but gratified at this response. Right? Why would you put that shit in your lungs? I nodded. Dylan always paused slightly before he swore, and then meticulously enunciated the expletive itself. I got the sense that he'd been extremely virtuous in school and was now making up for it. He wore the same turtleneck and blazer combination every single day, and his hair never seemed to grow past his military crew cut. Once I thought I'd seen a tattoo on his neck, but it turned out to be a large mole, which was maybe even a melanoma. Maybe he had skin cancer and didn't even know it. That was a great fear of mine. I spent a lot of time inspecting my own skin for moles and staying out of direct sunlight. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Our next panelist is Sydney Warner Brooman. They live in Toronto, Ontario. They received their BA at Western University in 2018 in London, Ontario, where they served as Western student writer in residence and an emerging artist in residence at the TAP Center for Creativity. Their debut short fiction collection, The Pump, is forthcoming with Insomniac Press in spring 2021. Their story, The Bottom, was shortlisted for the Malahat Review's 2020 Open Season Awards, and they have recent work in American Chordata, Thorn Literary Magazine, and other literary journals. Welcome, Sydney.
Hi, y'all. So I will be reading the first short story in my collection that's coming out this spring called The Pump. And I guess because they're interconnected stories, the only information that you would need to know going into the story is that the beavers eat people. So that's this is the first story in the collection. It's called The Bottom. Hallie got given a use for once, thank God, finally. She could help with the help for the first time. She was so goddamn helpful. Daddy pricked her finger with the tip of his hunting knife and spat out low, crunchy mosquito corpses and held the blade between his cracking teeth while he filled her palm with raisins. Her big brown eyes sucked up the sight so good. She was so damn good at looking, damn it, she was so good she can even be a looker for the mayor. Hardened marsh mud stuck between the mesh and her pink stockings, and she didn't even care because they were all dried up little bits now. Daddy pointed to the pines on the ground behind them. Smear the snacks good and scatter them into the cracks of the stumps. Hallie ran her finger over the raisins, which were bathwater fingers without the finger part. Daddy was probably hoping that she would trip and drop them all in the water so he could run his mouth over dinner about how he knew she'd find a way to fuck up the hunt. Pussy can't follow orders for shit. Bodhi's only 7 and he can throw a fucking raisin. I bring him out with the swarms of bugs snacking on his baby curls and he scoops up shit with his butterfly net and shoves it into his mouth like a dying hog and he can still throw a fucking raisin. At least they were in the marshes and not at the green IKEA table with the plastic chairs where they were all together, all alone, sitting in the loud quiet. Before Mama left, she made the loud quiet like she made rosemary bread, and they had to eat it all up, all gone, unless they wanted to drip skin till they were gangly skeletons. Ellie waded through the muck and put the pile of blood-covered raisins near the trees, and Daddy watched her with his arms crossed, all focused-like and everything. Now was the part with the waiting. Now was the part where you waited. Now was the waiting. That part. Daddy waited for the water to boil, and Daddy waited for spring for the hunt. Daddy waited for the cops to find the cabin, but pigs don't have good eyesight, so you just hide right in the middle, right in the open air. Hallie couldn't wait 1 second, 1 sentence, 1 nothing. Bodhi would plug his ears with moss when he was small, when Ellie was just a tiny little rat of a human, and would cry and 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 cry, and then they'd leave her in a little basin in the mud, so she really did look like a hog, and the beavers would hear her wailing, and they'd swim up from their little treasure holes like furry mermaid pirates, and they'd be sniffing around, twitching and such in the breeze, and even lick Ellie's little baby face, but they wouldn't eat her up like a chicken pie, because Daddy would wrap them from behind with his fishing net and plop, cut them on the head like a jack-o'-lantern. They used the raisins now that Ellie and Bodhi were too big to be bait. Daddy crossed an arm in front of Ellie's chest. Keep still, I hear the flapping, keep still. We all need the hats this winter, even Pussy needs a hat to keep warm. We get them before they get us, that's what I said, we get them before they get us. One waddled up to the stump from the darkness of the trees. Daddy clamped a hand over Ellie's mouth and Ellie looked out over the water. She was a good looker. She got that heavy feeling, almost like rocks, but not really, that made her not want to be there anymore. She wanted home. With Mama braiding her hair and slicking it back with hard hands and cooing into her left ear, do you see him? Do you see him? Hallie, do you see the beavers? Her and Mama would go out in their ripped bathrobes and walk barefoot under the big, big moon and into the water and call out to them, come on out, it's okay, we're all from the same place, we're the same, I can't skin you, we're the same. Mama looked at the baby beaver like she was looking at a dirty mirror, like she was moving back and forth and waiting for it to do the same. Then she put Ellie down in the mud and walked up to it, and the algae swished through the gaps between her toes, and she grabbed the sides of the beaver's face, and the whiskers twitched, and she told it a secret. Ellie couldn't hear, she only looked. Now, the beavers didn't see them. The beavers waddled over and sniffed the raisins. They ate, held little fingers up, really sucked on them like baby Ellie and her thumb. Daddy got the net ready. The mosquitoes swerved through the holes like dumb guppies. Ellie was looking and trying to eat up a loud quiet. She wished Mama was there to coo at the beaver and to tell it a secret so she could leave so fast. Should she say that she didn't need a hat anymore? That it was too warm and she just wanted to go home and sit at the IKEA table and have Mama braid her hair and look at Bodhi eating mud, and holy hell, she wanted to step out into the marsh water and stop in the middle of the pond and stand between Daddy and the beaver. She didn't. Time moved a little slow and a little fast and a little the same, like she was dizzy, but she'd felt that way before, like everything was everywhere, but she knew exactly where to look. Ellie trailed behind while Daddy hurried real slow around the pond. The beaver got up on its hind legs and gripped a raisin in its tiny claws and nibbled the skin of the raisin so good. Daddy was quick. 1 second, the beaver was there on its legs with the raisin, and it was so good. And another second, and its head was mashed potatoes pouring out from the sides, like a splashed watermelon, like an old paint tin with dried skin over the top, like you just want to put your hand in. The beaver screamed, and Ellie felt it at the tops of her teeth. Daddy pulled the knife out and swished it back and forth into the marsh water. Ellie knew that now she was Ellie, but with parts that were different, parts that were not the same. Those parts looked at the bits of the beaver and felt at ease. They felt like something had come into the world that was supposed to leave, and now it left, and the ground was wet, and everything was balanced. The old parts of her, the Mama parts, were sick and grieving, and the new parts had pricks of cold down their arms, a hum of light at the top of their heads. The old parts were the parts that were the same, and the beavers and the new parts knew that they weren't the same. They could never be the same. And it felt good. Not like a fire in a slow, warm dream, but good enough to know it was good. Daddy skinned the beaver, and Ellie watched, and her mouth smiled before she could tell it to. Nothing was the matter and everything mattered so much. Daddy sliced an ear off the beaver and let Ellie hold it on the way home. He carried the folded pelt himself because Pussy'll drop it in the water, that's for damn sure. Thick air sweat out into fog as they trudged back through the mud and the pines. Ellie sniffed the fur of the ear as she walked, felt each dark hair prickle the tip of her nose so good. She put her own ear up against it and she swore she could hear waves. She listened for the coos and clicks of the beavers sliding slick against the mossy rocks and gliding through the water of the deepest ocean. She waited for the sound of their bodies hitting the bottom. Thank you.
Thanks, Sydney. Our final panelist is Gabrielle Drolet. She works primarily as an essayist and a journalist. Her writing has appeared in outlets like the New York Times, the New Yorker, Teen Vogue, the Toronto Star, and more. She's a graduate student at the University of Guelph, where she's working on a fiction project. Welcome, Gabby.
Hello, thank you guys so much for having me. I feel like it's very hard to follow all those wonderful readings, but I'm going to be reading a piece of fiction as well. It's from a longer story called Life Model. There was a whole paragraph at the bottom of the application about sexual harassment. It assured me that, where I hired, the art school had policies in place to protect me, that students would face serious repercussions for pursuing or sexualizing me. This paragraph had followed 4 pages, asking about my body and my abilities. Have you ever been a dancer? Can you hold a pose for anywhere between 5 minutes and 4 hours? How would you describe your body type? Would you describe yourself as flexible? My interest in being a nude model, or a life model, as the school calls it, was sparked by a movie my ex had shown me, though he used the word film. It's worth noting that while he agonized over the correct language to discuss a film, he never cared about diction when it came to describing me. In the year we dated, I'd prompt him to try harder. In bed, when he leaned in and said, "I love you," my eyes would widen and I would say, "Tell me more." Greedy, sure, but honest. I wanted the validation. He never gave it to me, instead kissing my forehead and pretending he hadn't heard, or else coming up with something half-hearted and vague. "You're so hot," he might say, before rolling over and checking his phone. When it came to physical descriptors, he always opted for hot. I'd give the same reply. "Tell me more," I'd plead, and he'd shrug. That was all he could do. Anyways, the movie, or film, follows a tortured artist who spends his life trying to sell his paintings, most of which are of naked women. The whole thing is boring, with the exception of the scenes in the art class. The artist sits in a room full of other tortured artists, all men, all sadly dragging bits of charcoal across great sheets of paper, their palms and fingers blackened. At the center of the room, a woman leans back in the chair. She doesn't seem to notice or care that she's the subject of so many drawings, her eyes fixed on the studio's cement floor. What must that have been like? What did she think about during all those hours? In the end, when the artist does become famous and his old sketches sell for thousands, does she know she's the subject of so many of them? I asked my ex these questions and he sighed, telling me I'd missed the point of the movie, though he couldn't tell me what it was. When I got home that night, I sat in bed and Googled what it was like to be a nude model. A Reddit thread described the need for stamina. A blog post said it was fun. A personal essay said it was empowering, though tiring. You had to want it. You had to, the author said, be mentally prepared to become nothing more than a subject, your personhood whittled away. In his experience, he was never even introduced to the class by name. He just sauntered in, disrobed, and posed. If we're honest, the promise of anonymity enticed me. Halifax is a city, but a small one. I didn't want people to know who I was. Besides, Louise isn't the kind of name you want people to know. I'd rather have people fill in the blanks for themselves, imagining I'm named something different, like Charlotte or Valerie. I'm not sure those names are any more fitting than mine, but it's nice to imagine. And I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Gabby. All right, so what I'd like to talk a little bit about, because this panel is titled Becoming a Writer, is your guys' career paths, how you got to where you are, and particularly what kind of advice you give to younger writers. So my first question is really simple. What advice would you go to someone who aspires to be a writer who's going into university? I think we've got a substantial number of viewers, I hope, who are either anticipating going into university or are relatively early in their university career. So, Gabby, I'd like to start with you, and then we'll kind of work back through the panelists as they did the reading. What advice would you give your first-year self or someone else who has similar aspirations?
Yeah, sure. I think being open to the possibility of liking genres you don't expect to end up enjoying is a big thing. I think a lot of people, when they're like, I want to be a writer, they have this very specific idea of, I'm going to be a novelist or a journalist or a poet and whatever. And I think that's a very easy way to burn yourself out super quickly if you just focus on one thing with all of your attention all of the time. Being able to be a journalist, but also write fiction and poetry and take a break from journalism sometimes has been a real, I don't know, a real joy and also a real saver, right? I'm not burning myself out the same way.
Yeah, right. Thanks. Sydney.
So I definitely think that one of the most valuable things university gave me in terms of my writing was a sense of writing community and a sense of fellowship with other writers. I think there's this sort of old idea that like writing is a very solitary career. It's just between you and your words and your computer, and you can sort of just talk to yourself and to your editor and to your publisher, and then somehow a book just like appears. But I realized while in school that writing does not and cannot happen in a vacuum, that you not only have to experience things outside of your normal everyday routine, but you also have to hear about other people's experiences, read other people's writing, have fellowship and camaraderie and rivalry, and just have relationship, be in community with other writers. And I think getting to interact with people in our writing program and in other programs in university who may not be in writing, but who are still writers, it's super valuable to be in a space in which other people are willing to read your writing, because as soon as you graduate, it's actually quite hard, unless you're in like workshopping groups and things like that, to find that community. So to kind of get that foundation by meeting other people around your age and skill level who also write, I think is super important.
Awesome, thanks. Richard.
Yeah, advice for first-year self. I would say, do the readings is probably a huge part of it. It's very easy not to, obviously, but it's just a good idea. It's like the easiest way to improve your writing, in my opinion, at least, is to read a ton. And the workshop process is obviously very important, but I think a lot of the readings that your professor assigns, whether it's a traditional workshop class or a more literature-oriented class, will illustrate the fact that you're working even now in a tradition. It's a tradition that goes back hundreds of years. But I remember in my nonfiction, my creative nonfiction class, we got a lot of personal essays that we got to read, and there's a huge resurgence recently in the personal essay, obviously. So I would say it both improves your writing as a craft and helps you understand the immediate surrounding tradition that you're working in, both of which are excellent readings.
Camille.
I feel like my advice is short and blunt, and that's get out of the classroom, and I mean that in. I think like I come from a different, perspective than the other humans on the panel, because I actually didn't go through the writing studies program. Like I did my BA in literature and in performance, and I echo all of the advice that has been given so far because I agree wholeheartedly with all of it. But I think that so much of my personal learning, I know that so much of my personal learning has been getting outside of the classroom, finding communities that aren't in academic circles, talking to and meeting creative people of all different disciplines, of all different backgrounds and walks of life. That has been a really, really important and generative thing for me. And I think that extends to not just people in university, but humans that want to be writers from all different walks of life, all different ages and backgrounds and careers and perspectives. I think just getting out of a circle of comfort and like going to that event and talking to that person, or broadening your horizons and daring to sort of step outside of whatever your normal is, can be a really generative thing. But specifically for my first year self, I used to, I did all my reading. so Richard's current year self would be giving my first year self the good advice. But I sometimes I skipped class and went to the museum for a day and like ended up speaking for an hour with like XYZ random person that I met at the museum in an art exhibit. Like, and that was so generative for me. And I know that's like bad advice because this is like the university channel, but I think you have to get out of the classroom. I think that.
That's not bad advice at all. Thank you so much. Erica.
Yeah, I would kind of echo what everybody said. Definitely make use of all the resources that are available to you in the university. It's like a wealth of knowledge and creativity. But also, and this is advice for people who often take things too seriously, like myself, don't take everything so seriously. Everything feels very rushed. A lot of times, if you're watching your peers go down more traditional career paths, everything seems to be happening very quickly for them, right? Because they have a sort of a more simple step-by-step process. Writing takes longer. Take your time, experience the world, kind of like Camille was saying. And if the university experience isn't right for you, because it is an institution, right? And it can be difficult, especially for your mental health. You don't have to actually do it to publish things. Like, you can become a great writer without university. It works for some people and it doesn't work for others. So that's a good thing to keep in mind.
Right. Wonderful. I guess all of you have seen some fairly substantial success in publishing, performance, getting things produced. Broadly speaking, getting work out there. I'd like you to talk a little bit about your experience making that transition from doing things as a student who's producing assignments to getting stuff out there in the world, whether it's publishing, getting it performed, etc. How did you navigate that transition? What kind of advice would you give for people who are thinking, I want to take that next step from handing something in a class to trying to put it out there into the world? So Sydney, can I start with you?
Sure. So on a very practical level, I think I agree with Camille's answer to the last question about getting out and going to like events and things and meeting other people. I think one of the things that definitely helped me the most with publishing was to stop seeing publishing as this like giant unattainable, like magical, super professional thing. Like, it is like awesome, but it's also, I think, because I had such this big idea in my head of like, to get published, to be a published author, I like put authors on a pedestal. And I was afraid to talk to them. I wouldn't go to readings. I wouldn't go to like events and things, art showings, because I was like scared of people more. I was genuinely afraid of people more successful than me because I put them sort of on this weird pedestal. Like, I looked at publishing as this like point A to point B, like you're either like no one or you're famous sort of thing, which doesn't make sense in hindsight. So honestly, like, go and meet people, force yourself to go to readings and events. Everybody, no matter where you live, there are people producing work, whether it be well-known or whether they're doing a reading in which only their mom comes to. Go to the reading. There are people always producing different kinds of art and work all the time, wherever you live. Go and talk to them, go and be in community with them, follow them on their social media. Like if you read work by anyone, someone super famous or someone who's your neighbor. Tell them that you liked it, because people genuinely like to hear that. And I would say just in summary, force yourself to sort of bring down those like barriers of what you see as like I am not successful, but this person is successful. Like try to get rid of that in your mind, or at least fake it till you make it. And while interacting with people, because that's how you make those connections and realize that like everyone is just the same person who has to write to survive because they don't know any other way of existing. And you can be in community with awesome people and find opportunities through that.
Wonderful. Erica.
Yeah, so if you are in the university setting, I think it's okay to say it's okay to start small, right? Like I started by submitting to sort of university literary journals and magazines, and they might not be like the most well read of magazines in Canada, but they're a great place to familiarize yourself with how it works, right? Like what it means to write your author bio and submit it with your story, what it means to get that first publication and see that it's been like maybe edited a bit when it's up on the on the computer screen. So if you see those little opportunities, it's a great way to sort of familiarize with the whole process of publishing.
All right. Wonderful. Richard.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with Erica that you should make use of most campuses have campus publications, whether that's creative writing, poetry. Gabby and I did a stint at the Gazette, so journalism can also be an option if you have a campus paper. Once you get out into the the quote unquote real world, whatever that means, I mean, the truth is that I'm talking from like a freelance pitch perspective. You're pitching pieces around. The pitch world is hellish. I mean, it's no one ever gets back to you. You send long, timely pitches, and then they kind of go nowhere. Half people don't respond to their emails. All not to say that to discourage you, but just to say that the creative industries, especially right now, are very, very saturated. There's a lot of people trying to do the same thing. But you will get your break. You just got to keep plugging away at it, keep sending those emails, and sending those pitches around. And one day someone will respond to you and say, "We love your piece. We'd love to publish it." It's just you just got to be really, really. It's like beating your head in a wall sometimes. But yeah, I mean, not to be terribly discouraging or anything. Just be prepared for a long, tenacious stint of pitching your pieces around. And then once you have one, I mean, then ideally it snowballs, right? You can use prestige you get from a publication credit or a poem, an article, whatever it is, to tell the person you're pitching to, oh, I was published here, and then you have 2, and you have 3, and so on. And I mean, the truth is, this doesn't really go away. Increasingly, there are fewer and fewer full-time jobs in writing, but that's not to say it's impossible to make a career. You just have to be very adaptable. You have to be willing to maybe take some fluctuations in your income here and there. But if you can do that, I mean, it certainly is possible.
Thanks. Camille.
Got on mute. Yeah, I think the biggest the thing that I'm thinking of is just sort of getting past yourself or your perception of yourself as an obstacle and submit to stuff. And by stuff, I mean like everything. Like find stuff to submit to and submit to it. Like it's so strange looking sort of back on my professional journey because like my first, I guess, professional engagement with a theater, I was like 18 and still in university, and I submitted a script that I wrote to like a Southern Ontario playwrights cabaret, and from that I got in the room with a bunch of like pro-working directors and actors, and it was such a validating experience. Made me feel like I wasn't a baby, and that I deserved to be there. And that show ended up winning a national short playwriting prize. So it's like you really never know. And yeah, I think we have a lot of preconceived notions of who we are. Are we a writer? Are we not? What does that mean? And a lot of that anxiety is really just sort of a creative block, and learning to unblock yourself and just sort of put yourself out there, I know can be a quite scary thing. And I feel like it's become sort of cliche at this point to say that, but but truly just sort of opening yourself up to new experiences and submitting to something, even if you think there's no chance in hell you'll get it, you really never know. And just to echo what everybody else has said so far, because I agree with that as well.
Wonderful, thanks. Gabby, last but not least.
Yeah, as far as advice for getting published in the real world, as Richard said, I really do think that just pitching and submitting is the most important thing you can do. Again, to echo Richard, I think it can be really overwhelming and kind of exhausting if like you're pitching and submitting and everything's getting rejected, but eventually it won't, right? I think, I mean, I'm really, really proud to have something published in the New Yorker. I have submitted to the New Yorker an embarrassingly high amount of times. It's been like once a month for the past 4 years or something stupid before finally they accepted something. And you know, like, did I waste a lot of time on those submissions? Yeah, absolutely. But eventually something happened, right? And it's kind of the same with everything. Like sometimes a piece just won't get accepted anywhere, and that's fine. Sometimes it will. Some editors maybe will just like receive your piece on a bad day and not accept it. There are so many factors that go into whether or not a piece or a pitch gets accepted somewhere that even though it's easy to take it personally and be like, I'm garbage and my idea is garbage, it's probably not, and just send it somewhere else.
All right, thanks. We've had a number of people ask what advice you would give for older writers or mature writers who are entering university, intent on studying writing, or are thinking of it. So, Gabby, I'm going to start with you again, even though you just finished talking, because I did see that you gave an answer to this in the chat, and I want to make sure that everyone hears it and gives you a chance to elaborate on it as well. So, what kind of advice would you give to older or mature writers who are interested in this or interested in pursuing this?
Yeah, for sure. I think writing is really special because, as people have mentioned, you don't even necessarily have to go to school for it, right? A lot of people don't. And so, writing really is one of those things that you can kind of start at any point. Depending on what you want to do, you can just start pitching and submitting and joining. Almost every town has some sort of small little writers group. If not, you can make one. But I'm in my master's right now. I'm doing a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. And it's been really special and cool to see that about half of my classmates are mature students, right? And I never saw that at an undergrad level. But it's a program that doesn't require you to have like a prior degree in writing. And it's a lot of people who have been like paramedics and biologists and really random things that have come to writing later in life. And that's never not an option anymore. You can always start.
Great. Instead of circling around the panel with this one, does anyone else have anything they'd like to add to that? If you do, just pop your hand up and I'll ask you. Sydney.
Yeah, so I just something that I think is quite like I feel sort of the opposite. I feel like being sort of younger, I feel sort of like I don't have enough life experience to be writing about some of the things that I write about. So honestly, like I really do genuinely think that even if it sounds cheesy, that every single human being has a story to tell, and that every single person will tell their story a different way than another person. So to sort of like, this is less practical and more like psychological, but to get past that sort of societal expectation of like, you should be published and doing this at this age, and you should be going this degree and going here and being in these workshops and talking to these people with this publishing company, like being, no matter how old you are, especially if you're older, there's so much that you can tell, so much life experience, so many things that you have gone through and experienced from your perspective that nobody else could tell the way that you could tell. So it really, to get past those weird societal milestone, like you have to do these things at certain ages thing, is going to be the hardest step. And then after that, it's if you can really pull down that separation that self-esteem sort of separation from other writers, because I think like everyone feels not good enough to be a writer in different ways. I think if we can all sort of get past that, I think practically submitting to places, being in community with other writers and writing your truth, no matter what it is how to do it.
All right. I just want to remind everyone Camille, you want to go? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to agree with and echo Sydney. I think it's so important to keep in mind that many, many writers start later in life. And we have this fetishized notion of youth and genius, which is just BS. Like Alice Munro is a perfect example. She started late. And I'd say don't listen to those meta narratives, like don't let them block you. Because if you know intrinsically that you have a love for the craft, you're doing yourself a disservice for not pursuing that. That's it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. I'm already seeing questions pop up in the chat. I just want to remind everyone who's still in the audience that you are more than welcome to ask questions. I'm going to sort of keep my eye on that. If there are no questions, there's a couple that I'll ask now, but if no others pop up, I'll ask at least one more question of the panel. Okay. So Pauline Shen would like to know how much you revise before you finish a piece, and how do you know that a piece is done? Erica?
Okay, I'll speak to this because I am still working on this. Probably throughout my entire undergrad while I was writing, I hardly revised anything. I really like self-edit while I'm writing, which is fine. But I rarely went back and edited anything. And it was only when I was working on my full-length manuscript, I was actually working on it with Aaron, and he would come back to me and say, you have to rewrite this whole part. And I would sit there and go, no way. Like, I can't do it, right? And then I did, because I knew Aaron was expecting me to. So it's good to have that someone to keep you accountable like that. But I don't know how much I revised. There were obviously some parts you write and it's like perfect the first time. You don't need to touch it. And then there's some things you write that I would revise like up to 5 times, right? So it really depends on the piece that you're writing, but definitely revision is a necessary process, and it's arduous and it sucks, but you got to do it.
Anyone else want to chip in on that? How do you know when a piece is done? Richard?
I mean, you never do, I would say. And there have been instances where I've submitted things and then I've like seen them on the website or whatever, and I notice an error, and it's the worst feeling. So obviously you can't do anything at that point. But all this to say that, yeah, perfect is the enemy of progress, I suppose. You have to choose a point where you're happy with what you have. And I mean, it's easy to overwork things as well. Editing, revising is certainly a very important part of the process, but you do need to choose a point where you're like, okay, I'm done. This is as good as I could reasonably get it, and I need to send this off. So it's more of a maybe game than it might initially appear.
Great. Anyone else want to chip in? No? Okay. Gerald Harold would like to know. He says that he's got a bad habit of starting a story, burning out, and then abandoning it. He wants to know how you stay committed to story ideas to the point of actually completing them. And I think I would add to this as well. It's not just story ideas, but I think some of you have completed some much more substantial projects. So how do you stay committed to something that takes a chunk of time? Sydney?
I was actually just having a conversation with another writer about how in larger pieces, it's usually around if your piece is separated into thirds, like 3 acts, especially longer works like a play or a novel, it's usually around your second piece, like right in the middle, where you start losing momentum. And as you lose momentum and you and your characters are sort of stuck somewhere, you start thinking about how great it would be if you were in that really exciting first stage of a brand new project where you're just like sitting, having coffee, brainstorming, and it's like the most fun ever. And you're like looking at what your characters are going to look like and like researching things about beavers, and it's so fun. But it's when you get into that second, like one, having people to be accountable to, like, regardless of whether or not you like have an editor and your manuscript is actually due to someone, like just say to like the embarrassment of having said to someone that you're working on something and then having to admit that you abandoned it is real. So honestly, sometimes it's good to like let people know that you're working on something so you are too embarrassed to say that you stopped. I mean, sometimes an idea just doesn't work and isn't working. It's hard to tell when that is. I think only you are going to know when an idea is truly not working and you need to move on, or sometimes you need distance from an idea. Sometimes you need to put a manuscript down for a week, a month, and then come back to it and reread it, look at it again with fresh eyes, having had other experiences. But to find people to hold you accountable to it, and on like a practical prose level, if you're writing a novel and you're stuck in the middle and you feel like you're at a dead end, make something happen. Make literally anything happen at all. Get your characters out of where they are by doing something. Put something on fire, kill someone. Like, not actually, but like no. Yeah. So just but I can, people who are publishing things can also, like, it's a very relatable problem and I don't think it ever quite goes away. So having people to hold you accountable, and also force your characters out of their situation wherever they are if you're stuck.
Awesome, thank you. Camille.
Yeah, I hate first drafts. I'm just going to say it. I hate them. They're always awful, especially, I write mostly plays and performance pieces, so long form, and it's so easy to get stuck. And the pieces of advice I have is, and I wrote this in the chat, like, first of all, just try and get the thing out. Like, just try and write the draft as quick as you can, and don't think and don't judge yourself. Just get it out. Because I feel sometimes when we lose momentum in the middle of a project is because we start overthinking and we start thinking, oh, I don't know if this is working, and then we get kind of in our own heads and we lose that initial burst that we had at the start of it. And so that's why I say when you have the energy, like, just try and get it out and then judge yourself later and then edit it later, because you can always do that. And like, even the best writers in the world, I guarantee their first drafts are bad. So knowing that. And I think also, like, I mean, I know this in the context of writing scenes, but I'm sure it applies to chapters or sections. Like, if you're bored with the section that you're working on and you're like, oh, I don't know what this is, but I've got this idea of what's going to happen like down the road in this section, and that's really exciting, but I have to write this. Like, you don't have to write that. Write the things that are exciting. Things will fill in as they start to make sense, but don't feel like you have to do things linearly. Like, write the bits that excite you, and the rest of it will, like, the picture will come, I feel, as well.
Awesome, that's great advice. Anyone else want to chip in? No? Okay. Susan Cruikshank would like to know about if people could talk about pitching ideas and articles. So those of you who have done that, I think Richard, Gabby, maybe Camille, I may be leaving someone out, correct me if I am, but what kind of advice can you give for that? Gabby?
Yeah, pitching sucks. Pitching is so hard, so consistently. And like Richard said, oftentimes you just won't hear back from people, and that's not a marker of your idea being bad. It's just a marker of people getting too many emails and not answering. I think that pitching when you're starting can be really overwhelming, and it's very easy to overwrite a pitch. Like, say you want to write an article about, I don't know, the local literary festival and how it's gone online. You can condense that into very few words, right? If you go online and Google how to pitch an article, you'll find generic structures that you can use. And usually it's just like, why is this interesting? How you're going to write it, who you are, and why you're the person to write it. And that's it. I know when I was starting, though, I would spend so long researching pitches and then just like writing the hell out of them, and they would be perfect. But you don't hear back from pitches enough for that to be worth it, right? Just write the bare bones of what you need. And if an editor needs to know more information, they will ask that of you. But don't don't like force yourself to spend hours and hours in every pitch. Just write what you need, send it out, and also find the right editors. That's a really big thing. I think it's easy at the beginning to go like submissions@vice.com, send. No one reads that inbox. I know it says someone does on the website. No one will ever answer you. Don't do that. If you have Twitter, that's a really good way of finding. Most publications will have like lists of their editors. Find an editor who accepts the kind of thing you're pitching, pitch them directly. But yeah, any sort of like submissions@walrus.ca, you will never hear back. Absolutely not. So yeah.
Richard.
Yeah, just I mean to echo a lot of what Gabby's already said. You have to be really, really mercenary, I think, with pitches. Kill your darlings is like the step one, essentially. Yeah, find the editor email. And there's pitching is kind of an art in itself. Like it's easy. I remember when I first started like pitching around, they'd be like, "Oh, like I'm thinking about writing this piece. Like I do this. What do you think?" You can't really do that. Like you have to, get them into the hook. Why is it timely? Pitch the piece, give them your credentials, and you have to compress that all into like 2 paragraphs, right? And the person who owns this email is scrolling through the slush pile. Half of the things in there are like completely deranged, so they're flicking, they're scrolling on their phone while they're eating lunch half the time. So you really can't as Gabby said, don't overwork it. Condense into like the smallest thing you can. You're basically making a sale as more than like actually doing any creative writing. You're selling not only your piece, but why it should be you to write this piece. So it should be very, very mercenary and ruthless in that sense about it.
Anyone else? Camille.
This isn't my advice, but I'm very bad at pitches and writing about my own work. Full disclosure. And I have a friend who took me through a bit of a workshop on pitching, and he said to me, every pitch is a battle essay. and for the kind of work that I do, because a lot of the things I'll apply for are not necessarily like pitching articles, but like pitching yourself for opportunities, applying to this thing, and like writing, like artist statements and why I'd be good for this opportunity. Like what I mean by battle essay is it's like you don't have to be meek and I'm done. Like, no, if you think you're gonna change the world with your thing, say that. Do you know what I mean? And I think sometimes we get very like, but I'm a baby, I'm anxious about now. Like, being confident, I think, is a very big thing. Yeah, and that's the kind of pitch I can speak to, at least.
Right. Anyone else? No? Okay, in that case, I want to throw it out to the audience. I think we've gone through all of the questions that I've noticed in the chat. Are there any more questions? I'm waiting. I'm not seeing anything. I'm waiting. I'm not seeing anything. I think this brings us then to the end of the panel. I would like to thank all 5 panelists, Sydney, Erica, Richard, Gabby, and Camille. This was really wonderful. Thank you so much for doing this. Thanks to WordsFest for hosting it. I'm just waiting just in case another question pops up, but I'm not seeing anything.
Aaron, there's one for you. There's one for you, Aaron. There's one for you. It says, Aaron, advice on moderating.
Advice on moderating. That just popped up. Try to be organized. You're catching me off guard. My advice on moderating, be organized, talk to the people whose panel you're moderating about what you're going to do in advance of actually doing it. So we were on, I think most of us by about 5:15, maybe, I think Richard, you had class, so you popped in at about 5:30. We walked through the structure of the panel, how the panel was gonna work, so that when I was calling on panelists, when I was getting them to read, all of that was planned in advance, so people knew what order that was going to come in. So be organized and communicate that organizational structure to your panelists. I like to do things like, I sent them a few questions in advance to get them thinking. You don't need to do that. Questions can be surprises, but the way the panel itself is going to work shouldn't be a surprise. So that's what I would say. Plan it, make sure your panelists know. We have couple more questions that I think we have time to get to. Does anyone have any experience with scrolling ebook publishing like Smashwords? If you want to just pop your hands up if you have any experience with that. Fortunately, I don't think we're getting any yeses, so I don't think anyone's worked with that. Any opinions on self-publishing? Erica?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with self-publishing. Self-publishing is a great way to get sort of underrepresented voices out into the community in a lot of instances, right? You kind of bypass the gatekeepers. I would never be able to self-publish because I don't think I have the connections that you need. Like, I don't think I would get enough readers. I'm just like a natural introvert and not very good at meeting people. I really have to force myself to do that. So I myself am trying to go more the traditional route, because then you have the publisher and publicists and different people to sort of spread your work around, even though you do a lot of the work yourself. But if you already have that community and like sort of a network, then self-publishing can be a great option.
Yeah. Richard?
Yeah. So I haven't personally self-published, but this is what I gather from it. It's kind of a trade-off there. You get to escape the kind of big five oligopoly. You can there's a way into publishing without having to try and land a deal with Penguin or Macmillan or something. However, it does mean that you have to do things which you might not want to do. Like, I think marketing is the biggest one. You have to do all of your own PR. You have to do all of your own kind of like social media sharing and stuff like that. And personally, I mean, I would hate to do that. So that's like Erica, I think I would much rather opt to go the traditional route, solely because I wouldn't want to have to think about that kind of thing. It's completely beyond me, frankly.
Thanks. We also have another question that I think dovetails with this nicely. Is it useful or advantageous to have a writing website or hub, or is it better to just be engaged on social media? So essentially a promotional question. On the basis of your experience, what do you prefer? What works best? Gabby and Camille.
Yeah, I would say both. Social media, I mean, it depends on the kind of person you are and the way you engage on social media. I have found Twitter to be like the most important tool for getting published, which sounds really silly and counterintuitive. But it's just such a good way of meeting editors and, I don't know, people from different publications. And then a friend can publish something and you can DM them and be like, hey, who was your editor? And it's my basis for having like a writing network. That being said, having a website makes you seem more legit, I find. And then it's nice also if you're pitching or submitting stuff, you can be like, you can find my portfolio on my website, which just makes you sound like you have, yourself together, maybe even more than you do. But it kind of establishes you as a real person in a way that not having a website doesn't. And there are so many really useful tools for building websites that are really easy and accessible. Like, there's a lot of free website platforms out there. So yeah, I think having both is like perfect.
Camille.
Yeah, I agree with Gabby. Both is definitely the way to go. As for reasons that Gabby mentioned, like, I don't know if for those that follow Gabby on Twitter know that Gabby's Twitter is a performance piece that I love very much. But it is true though, like websites like Twitter are great to sort of like connect with different writers, different editors, different people that are around you, already involved in a community. And it's very easy to sort of interact with someone with literally like pushing a follow button or a like or a reblog. Like, those things do add up as juvenile, I guess, as that sounds, but it is true. But having a website, I'm a very big advocate for that. Like, for someone like me who I work with a lot of different mediums and across a lot of different disciplines, and it's really helpful to have sort of one hub to always direct people, especially like when you're pitching or applying yourself to things. People can go, oh, I can see photos of this or links to this in a very easy, accessible manner. So I would say absolutely.
Wonderful. Anyone else? No? Okay, I think, and please someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have covered all the questions that were posted in the chat. I'm going to just wait a little bit to make sure. I'm not seeing anything pop up. I'll keep waiting, but I think that brings us to the end of the panel. So Sydney, Erica, Richard, Gabby, and Camille, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your insights. Really, really wonderful. And I think all of us who are in attendance are going to look forward to seeing what you do in the future. So wonderful chatting, and thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who attended as well, and WordsFest for putting this on. Bye.
Thank you.